I waive my interest in the above account. The mediator thought she blanked. Her husband thought he won. They were both looking at the wrong document. Right here on Historical Manhwa. The morning of our 7th wedding anniversary, I woke up to the smell of his cologne on the pillow. Cedar and something synthetic. The expensive kind that costs $200 and smells like a man who wants to be taken seriously. I lay still for a moment, eyes open, staring at the pale ceiling of our bedroom, running my palms flat against the thread count I had selected 6 years ago from a catalog I no longer subscribed to. 7 years. I had been dead for 3 of them. Not literally. Or maybe literally. I had never been entirely certain about the mechanics of what happened to me at the end of my first life. What I knew, with the certainty of someone who has lived through a thing and carried the memory of it into a new morning, was that I had lived this before, every detail of this particular Tuesday. As the damp weight of October air through the window I had left cracked the night before, the sound of a city bus changing gears on the street below, the gray line of light along the floor where the curtains didn't quite meet. I knew what the barista at the coffee shop on the corner would say when I ordered. I knew that Dorian's assistant, Priya, a meticulous young woman who would never find out what she had been inadvertently facilitating, would call at 9:15 to confirm the dinner reservation. The restaurant was called Caldwell, 32nd floor. White tablecloths and a sommelier who had that particular quality of speaking about wine in a way that made you feel you had been mispronouncing everything for years. It was our 7th anniversary dinner, and in my first life, it was the night everything had come apart. Or rather, the night nothing had come apart yet, because in my first life, I had sat across from a man who smelled like this pillow and smiled at me across the white tablecloth, and I had not known, not even suspected, that he had been lying to me for 2 years. The dinner had been pleasant. We had ordered the fish. He had held my hand across the table in the way he held my hand when he wanted to seem like the kind of man he had decided to be that evening, and I had thought, in the vague and slightly tired way of someone who has been married for 7 years and is still waiting for the part where it gets easier, that we were doing all right. 6 weeks later, a mutual friend had mentioned something offhand. And then I had begun to look. And then I had found Lavinia. I pressed my palms flat against the mattress and breathed through my nose. The ceiling fan made a sound like a low, continuous exhale. Below it, the bedroom was exactly as I had left it in my memory. The stack of books on my nightstand that I had been meaning to read, the framed print on the wall that I had chosen because it was the right size and the wrong reason, the surface of things in a life that had looked, from most angles, like enough. I did not hate him yet. That was the thing I remembered most clearly from my first life. I hadn't hated him on this particular morning. I had loved him with the slightly worn, slightly taken for granted love of someone who has shared a kitchen and a tax return and a set of winter plans for many years in a row. The love had been real. I wanted to be precise about that. It had been real and ordinary and not enough by itself to protect me from what was coming. But in my first life, I had not been given time to stop loving him before I lost him. That particular sequence, loving first, then losing, then understanding the full shape of what had been lost, was the part that had done the most damage. It had taken years to process, and by the time I was done processing it, I was 41 and starting over with $40,000 in a brokerage account and a sense of moral clarity that had not compounded at any appreciable rate. This time, I already knew how it ended, which meant I had a decision to make, and I made it within the first few minutes of being awake. I could confront him immediately, use what I knew, collapse the marriage this morning before he had technically done anything I could prove in this particular timeline. There was a version of that choice that felt righteous. Striding into the kitchen, saying his name in a certain tone, watching his face do the thing faces do when someone has been found out. I had imagined that scene many times in my first life, in the months after the divorce. The way you imagine conversations you were not fast enough to have. But I was not doing that. I had decided, somewhere in the hazy territory between sleeping and waking, that rage was not the mechanism I wanted, that the righteous scene in the kitchen would give me a feeling that would last approximately 30 seconds, and what came after would be the same divorce I'd had before, just with more witnesses to my anger and fewer months to prepare. I wanted something else. I got up and made coffee. His side of the kitchen counter was the left half. His vitamins in a precise row by the window, a daily multivitamin, a fish oil capsule, a magnesium supplement he'd started taking for sleep, the protein powder in the cabinet above the sink, his branded water bottles in the second drawer, each one washed and refilled with the methodical care of a man who had decided that this particular ritual said something about his character. I stood looking at the vitamin row for a moment. Then I moved it 2 inches to the right. A small thing, inconsequential. I just wanted to know if this life was real or if I was watching a recording that couldn't be changed, like a film with a fixed ending playing on a screen I was trapped behind. I stood by the window and drank my coffee and waited. The city below was doing what it always did at 7 in the morning. Trucks, on a bicycle courier cutting the wrong way down a one-way street, the sound of a scaffolding crew starting work on the building across from ours. I moved the vitamins back. It was real, or real enough, and I had approximately 11 months. In my first life, the divorce had been finalized 11 months after the night at Caldwell when everything had fallen apart. Those 11 months had been the most expensive of my adult life, and I did not mean that only in legal fees. I meant the cost of not understanding what you had and what it was worth and what would happen to it while you were in the process of losing it. I had walked away from 7 years with 1/3 of the equity in a condominium that had not recovered its pre-recession value, a joint brokerage account worth $40,000, and the proud, and idiotic knowledge that I had let him keep the retirement account because it had seemed in the mediation conference room like the humane thing to do. His attorney had proposed dividing it. A QDRO, a qualified domestic relations order, which I had not known the name of at the time, would have allowed me to take my share directly into my own IRA, penalty-free and tax-deferred until retirement. My attorney had explained this to me. I had overruled her. Dorian had been 51. He was starting over. The retirement account was the bulk of his savings. He'd asked for it in a tone that was careful and reasonable and designed to make me feel that I was the bigger person if I agreed. I had agreed. 18 months later, his company had failed, and he had liquidated the entire retirement account, every dollar of the $820,000 balance, to inject capital into a company that survived the injection for 8 months and then died anyway. I had done the math at 2 in the morning, in my apartment, with a glass of water and a calculator, and the particular cold-eyed clarity that comes from no longer having anything at stake in the outcome. 10% early withdrawal penalty to the IRS. Then federal income tax at his marginal rate. He'd had a good year, consulting income on top of everything else, so 32% federal. Then state. When you summed the penalties and the taxes, he had burned somewhere between 40 and 45% of that account before a single dollar reached the company. He had liquidated $820,000. He had received approximately $466,000. He had sent $466,000 into a company that lasted another 8 months. I remember setting down the calculator and looking at the ceiling for a long time. The divorce settlement had listed the retirement account as worth $818,000 and the condo equity as worth $690,000. His attorneys had formally noted that I had received the lesser asset. I had signed the document agreeing with this assessment. I had signed. Standing in our kitchen on the morning of our 7th anniversary, with the coffee warming my hands and the vitamins back in their exact row and the city moving below us, I thought, in this life, I am going to sign the same document, and I am going to understand exactly what I am signing. Dorian came into the kitchen at 7:40, showered, on wearing the gray wool trousers I had helped him select at the department store on 5th during a weekend trip 3 years ago. He looked the way he always looked, solid, composed, handsome in the specific way of a man who has decided what kind of man he is and has been executing that decision consistently for 2 decades. It worked, as a presentation. It had worked on me. "Happy anniversary," he said. He kissed my temple. The cologne was on his neck and collar, applied after the shower. "Happy anniversary," I said. I handed him his coffee. He took it the way he always took his coffee. Both hands around the mug, a particular hold that I had found endearing in the first year of our marriage and had since catalogued without effect, the way you catalog the specific habits of a life you have been living. He stood by the window. Whoa, he had a talent for looking contemplative. It was, I had come to understand, a talent rather than a quality. a performance of interiority that was very convincing and not quite the same thing as the real event. "Caldwell tonight?" he said. "I remember." He glanced over at me with something slightly warmer in his expression than our usual morning register. We were trying today. It was our anniversary, and he was the kind of man who tried on anniversaries with the specific effort of someone who knew he had not tried sufficiently the other days. "You look good," he said. "Thank you." I put my mug in the sink and went to get dressed. I had an 11:30 appointment that I had not had in my first life on this day. I had made it yesterday, or 3 years ago, depending on how you counted. I was going to see Patricia. Patricia Godfrey's practice was on the 4th floor of a building 3 blocks from my office at the Meridian Group. The elevator in that building smelled of old paper and cleaning fluid, a smell I had always found reassuring in financial offices for a reason I couldn't explain. Something about the suggestion of records, of things being treated, of permanence. I had met Patricia through a college friend the year before Dorian and I married. She had set up my individual IRA and told me to keep it separate, always in my name alone, and I had done so for the first 2 years and then gradually let it slide. Dorian had opinions about money management. He was good at the particular confidence of a man who expects to be deferred to on subjects he's studied, and I had a tendency to defer that I had not yet named or corrected. In my first life, I had called Patricia 2 months after the divorce was finalized, when I was sitting with $40,000 and a property I couldn't quite afford to keep. She had listened and then said, in the patient voice of someone who has given this particular piece of advice before and not been listened to, "Mara, I wish you had called me 8 months ago." 8 months, which would have been the beginning of the end of the marriage, which was approximately now. I was calling her now. She was at her desk when I arrived, her gray hair close-cropped, her posture the economy of movement of a woman who has decided that elegance means precision. She looked at me when I sat down in the chair across from her desk and said, "You don't look like yourself." "I've been thinking," I said. "About what?" "Specifically, about early withdrawal penalties on 401k accounts, the penalty calculation, the interaction with marginal tax rates." A brief pause. Patricia had a way of going still when she was paying attention. "Are you talking about your account?" "Someone else's, eventually," I said. "Right now I want to understand every account, every asset, everything in my name, his name, and jointly. I want to know exactly where I stand." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to file?" she said. "Not today." "But—" "Yes." She pulled a legal pad across the desk toward her. She did not ask me what had happened because she was Patricia, and she understood that sometimes the reason for a decision is not the operative information. The operative information is the decision itself and what to do with it. "Okay," she said. "Well, let's start from the beginning." What we mapped out that morning, over 2 hours and 2 cups of the coffee her assistant brought in without being asked, the Haverstock condo, assessed at $1.1 million. Mortgage paid down to $420,000, leaving approximately $680,000 in equity. We had bought it in the 3rd year of our marriage, when Aldercroft Ventures had just closed its Series A and Dorian had felt, for about a year, that everything was about to accelerate. We had put down a substantial amount and paid aggressively on the principal because Dorian preferred not to carry debt he could see. It was one of the financial habits I actually respected. The joint brokerage account, $94,000, down from a peak of $118,000 18 months ago when the market had made a correction neither of us had fully accounted for. Dorian's 401k through the Aldercroft Ventures company plan, $786,000 on the most recent statement, which I had seen because I handled all our mail. The employer match had been generous in the good years. The account had been maxed every year since he was 40, which meant 7 years of maximum contributions plus compounding. My own IRA, $38,000. This number represented years of neglect. I had contributed minimally since the marriage because Dorian had suggested, reasonably and not unkindly, that we focus our investment dollars on the joint brokerage instead, where we could choose our own allocations. I had agreed. I had watched my own retirement savings atrophy to a number that made me feel, sitting in Patricia's office for the first time in 3 years, slightly sick. My salary from Meridian, competitive for the role, But I had been operating at approximately 60% of my actual capacity for several years, managing the household logistics, traveling with Dorian when it seemed important, being present in a way that costs something, even when you don't name what it costs. Patricia wrote for a long time. When she put the pen down, she looked at me over the legal pad with the evaluating look she had given me at the party where we first met, when I had asked her whether she thought most people understood the mechanics of their own financial decisions, or whether they mostly hoped. She had said, "Most people hope." I had said, "What are you then?" She had said, "I plan." "You understand," she said now, "that every financial decision you make between now and filing will be subject to examination." "I know." "Which limits what we can do. Well, so I want to be clear about that. We are not moving money in ways that look improper." "I know. I don't want to hide anything. I want to do everything correctly. I just want to do it in the right order." She tilted her head. "What's the right order?" "First, I stop underutilizing my own retirement accounts. I had been contributing 12% of my salary to the Meridian 403B and neglecting my IRA entirely. I want to redirect, max my IRA, open a Roth, bring the 403B to the annual maximum. That's defensible. You're entitled to manage your own retirement savings. Second, I want to understand the after-tax value of the condo equity versus the after-tax value of the retirement account, not the face value, the value I would actually receive." Patricia looked at me steadily. "You're thinking about asking for the property in the settlement." "I'm thinking about whether it's worth more than the retirement account in real terms." This was the calculation I had not understood in my first life. On paper, the retirement account looked larger. The condo had a mortgage attached to it, which made it look like a liability. But when you accounted for the capital gains exclusion, a single person can exclude up to $250,000 in capital gains on the sale of a primary residence, provided they've lived there for 2 of the previous 5 years. The real value of the 2 assets was not what their face values suggested. If I took the condo in the settlement and bought out his equity, I owned an asset that I could sell within the next several years and exclude a substantial portion of the gain from federal income tax entirely. So if he took the retirement account and withdrew it early, which I believed he would need to do, for reasons I was not yet prepared to share, he would lose 35 to 45% of every dollar he touched. The account that looked bigger would, in certain predictable circumstances, leave him with considerably less than the equity I'd taken. "You want the property," Patricia said. "I want him to want the retirement account more than the property." A pause. "Why would he want the retirement account more?" "Because he'll need liquid access to capital in the next 18 months, I said. "And the retirement account, once he has it, gives him that option, even though exercising that option will cost him enormously." "And he doesn't know what you know," she said. I looked at her. "I know his business. And as I helped build the pitch deck that got their Series B, I sat through enough investor dinners to understand the gap between what Dorian presents and what the numbers actually say. He needs capital. The institutional funding is running dry. He is going to look at that retirement account and see a bridge." Patricia was quiet for a long time. "What do you know about QDRO mechanics?" I said. She put her pen down with a small deliberateness, the way people set things down when they want a moment before speaking. "A qualified domestic relations order," she said. "It's the legal mechanism that allows a divorcing spouse to receive their share of a retirement account without triggering the early withdrawal penalty. The court issues the order, the plan administrator divides the account. Us and the alternate payee, that would be you, rolls their portion directly into their own IRA. Tax deferred. No penalty at the point of transfer. So if we divided the account equally through a QDRO, I could roll $400,000 into my IRA penalty-free. Yes, you'd pay income tax when you eventually withdraw in retirement, but no penalty and no immediate tax liability at the time of transfer. And his $400,000 would also remain in the plan with no withdrawal until retirement age. Assuming he doesn't touch it before then, yes. And if he touches it before 59 and a half, 10% penalty to the IRS, then income tax at his marginal rate on the full amount withdrawn." I let that sit between us. "What if I waive the QDRO?" I said. Patricia said my name. What if I let him keep the full account? I said. But he sold the entire $818,000 in exchange for full equity on the property. The property equity is $680. The after-tax value of the retirement account, if accessed early, is closer to $460 or $470, depending on his income that year. Mara, you're trading a guaranteed $400,000 in a penalty-free rollover for an asset I understand, for an asset I intend to manage correctly, for an asset that doesn't evaporate when the person holding it makes a desperate decision. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. If this goes wrong, she said finally, you walk away from over $800,000 in potential value. I walk away from a claim on money that I believe is going to be substantially destroyed by the person holding it. Oh, and I take instead an asset I can control. She looked at me across the legal pad. Do you have documentation of the company's financial position? No. What I have is years of being present in rooms where people talked about numbers they thought I wasn't fully tracking. Another pause. That's not documentation, she said. No, but it's why I'm right. She looked at me for a long time. All right, she said. Let's talk about what you need in the next 11 months. Over the following weeks, I did the following things, all of them legal and all of them disclosed. I updated my contribution elections for the Meridian 403B to the annual maximum of $23,000. I noted the change in the household financial records where I tracked our expenses. Oh, Dorian did not notice the change because he did not review my account contributions with any regularity. He had set up his own retirement account years ago and considered the topic handled. I opened the Roth IRA Patricia had recommended years ago and contributed the annual limit. I made the maximum catch-up contribution to my traditional IRA since I was past 50. These contributions were documented, noted, and fully compliant. I also, for the first time since the marriage, asked for a meeting with the director of my division at Meridian. Her name was Josephine, and she was in her late 40s, with the careful informality of someone who has spent years in an environment where information is power and has decided that warmth is the better armor. I sat in her office and told her what I was capable of that I had not been demonstrating. You mean I had 2 specific project proposals written out. I asked for the meeting not in the tentative, apologetic register I had used at Meridian for the past several years, but in the direct tone of someone who has decided that apologizing for what you can do is a resource expenditure that doesn't pay a return. She looked at the proposals for a long time. Why now? She said. I have more capacity than I've been using, I said. I'd like to use it. She said she would review the proposals. A week later, she assigned me both projects. I also called Gideon Ferris. Gideon ran a family law practice in a building near the courthouse, on the 3rd floor above a dry cleaner that gave the hallway a particular smell of steam and chemicals. He was 56. And with the rumpled precision of a man who had decided long ago that what mattered was the quality of his preparation and not the quality of his suit, though the suit was, on examination, very good. He had a reputation in the legal community for being methodical to the point of exhausting opposing counsel. Someone had mentioned his name during my first divorce as a reason to hire someone else if I wanted a clean, quick settlement. In my first life, I had taken that advice. I had hired Harriet, who was excellent, and whose advice I had then overruled in the specific moment that cost me the most. This time, I was calling Gideon. We met for coffee at a place near his office. He listened to my description of the situation. Not all of it, but the shape of it. And then he said, "How soon?" "Late spring," I said. You want the property. And I want him to want the retirement account. He looked at his cup for a moment. "You've already worked with a financial planner." "Yes." "Is this about getting the better settlement on paper or getting the better outcome in fact?" "The better outcome in fact." He nodded. "Then you understand that what we cannot do is make the retirement account look less attractive to his side. We need them to fight for it. We need them to believe they won when they get it." "Yes." Which means we do not bring in a financial expert who will explain the potential downside of holding a retirement account when the holder is likely to need early access. "Correct." We argue the other side of the property. We make the condo look uncertain. Market conditions, carrying costs. We're worried about the property. We're fighting for the account. And then, I said. We walk away from the account reluctantly. He looked at me. Something in his expression that was not quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. You've thought this through? He said. I had time, I said. The next 9 months were the quietest I had ever moved through a life that was ending. I did not confront Dorian. I did not alter the temperature of our evenings. I cooked on the nights I usually cooked. I attended his company dinners and his investor events and stood in rooms with people who were trying to decide whether Aldercroft was worth further backing, and I asked questions that I already knew the answers to. And I watched Dorian present his company with the precise confidence of a man who has not yet admitted to himself what the numbers say. I slept beside him in the bed that smelled of cedar and the synthetic thing, and I thought about Patricia's spreadsheet. There was a moment, in the 5th month, when I came close to doing the thing I had decided not to do. It was a Saturday in late winter. Dorian was at a dinner, a client thing, he said. I was at home. I had made myself pasta with a very decent bottle of wine from the rack we'd built together in the 2nd year of our marriage. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the financial folder Patricia had put together, the one I kept in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, and I was thinking about Lavinia. Lavinia Arabella. I always thought of her full name, for reasons I couldn't explain. Perhaps because her name had the particular quality of a thing that had been chosen with care, and which I resented. She was 33, she worked in marketing for a firm that had done communications work for Aldercroft Ventures. She had met Dorian at a conference 2 years ago, in a city I had not accompanied him to, because I had a project deadline and had thought, without examining the thought, he'll be fine. In my first life, I had seen their first public photograph together on Instagram 6 weeks after our divorce was finalized. It was from Barcelona. They were at a rooftop restaurant, and the light was good, and they were not touching but standing close in the way people stand when they have decided they are allowed to touch now that the relevant obstacles have been removed. I had told myself then that the timing was coincidental, that it was new. Oh, that I was not the kind of woman who combed through years of her marriage looking for the precise coordinates of the lie. I had been, in fact, exactly that kind of woman. I had done it alone, in the dark, for a year. Now, in my 2nd life, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine that was very good and would never again come from this particular rack, and I knew exactly where Dorian was and who he was with, and the anger moved through me like pressurized water through a pipe. Not explosive, not wild, just steady and hot and at a consistent temperature that I had learned over 9 months to work alongside. I finished my wine. I put the glass in the sink. I went to look at the financial folder. The numbers had not changed since the last time I had looked at them, which was 4 days ago. As they would not change in the next 4 days either. Numbers are patient in the way that people are not. They wait. I went to bed. The discovery, when I engineered it, or rather, when I allowed myself to discover it in the formal sense of the word, happened in the 7th month. I had known, but knowing and having documentation are different things, and Gideon had been clear that documentation would make certain aspects of the process simpler. I did not spy on my husband. I want to be precise about this. I had, in my first life, gone through his phone 6 weeks after the anniversary dinner, when the accumulation of small things had become too heavy to ignore. In this life, I simply stopped looking away from the things I had been carefully not seeing. The hotel charge on the joint credit card statement. As the restaurant I recognized from its address. It was 3 blocks from Lavinia's office, and I had looked up Lavinia's office because Aldercroft's vendor list was something I had access to as the person who managed our household finances. 2 charges, on a Saturday when Dorian had told me he was at a planning session with his operations team. I photographed the statement. I sent it to Gideon. He wrote back, "This, combined with the other documentation we have, is sufficient to establish what we need for the property settlement argument." I put my phone in my pocket and went back to work. The filing happened in late April, on a Tuesday morning that smelled of rain on asphalt. Gideon handled the mechanics. Dorian was served at his office, not at home. Gideon had suggested this for reasons of procedural clarity. Oh, Dorian called me that evening. "Mara," he said. "Dorian." A pause, the particular pause of a person who is trying to find the correct tone for an incorrect situation. I thought we would talk first. We could have talked at any point in the last 2 years, I said. The window for that has closed. Another pause. Is there anything? My attorney will be in touch with yours, I said. I'd prefer we handle this through the appropriate channels from here. I ended the call. I stood in my kitchen for a moment. Then I made dinner. Mediation is a specific kind of theater. Everyone in the room understands this, and no one says it directly. The mediator, a man named Thaddeus, who had the careful exhaustion of someone who has watched people fight about money for 30 years, managed the pace. Only the attorneys performed their positions. And across the conference room table, in a building that smelled of recycled air and the dry tang of printer toner, I watched Dorian watch me. His attorney was Callum. Blonde, precise, with the efficient aggression of someone who bills by the hour and therefore does not waste them. He had prepared well. He had the retirement account statement printed and tabbed, the balance highlighted, the employer match history annotated. The first session established the obvious. The significant assets were the condo, the brokerage account, and the 401k. Everything else was marginal. The first session was about framing. The second session was about the retirement account. Callum presented it with the confidence of someone bringing a strong hand to the table. $818,000. And 7 years of contributions, plus employer match, plus compounding, and a proposal to divide it equally through a queued row, giving each party approximately $409,000 in a tax-deferred rollover. Gideon pushed back. He raised questions about the vesting schedule on the employer match. He noted that a portion of the contributions predated the marriage, which created a separate property argument. He questioned the current market valuation and whether the recent correction had been adequately reflected. Callum objected to all of this with increasing efficiency. He was, I noticed, very focused on protecting the account. He had been briefed on what his client needed. Dorian sat across from me through all of this and held his pen very slightly too tightly. I watched his hands rather than his face, because hands are harder to manage than expressions. Honestly, he was afraid, not of me specifically, of losing the account. The fear had a particular quality. The fear not of the known disaster, but of the contingency plan disappearing. I had seen him manage fear before, in investor meetings when the questions got hard. He had a way of going very still, very composed, and letting only his hands show what was happening internally. His hands were showing it now. By the end of the second session, we had not reached agreement. Thaddeus suggested a brief recess. In the hallway, which smelled of the same recycled air as the conference room, Gideon and I stood at the window. He needs it, Gideon said quietly. Not a question. Yes. His attorney is not going to accept the QDRO split if there's an alternative. I know. Gideon looked at me for a moment. You're ready. Yes, once you sign the waiver. That's final. I want to be certain you understand that. I understand. He looked out the window. A delivery van was double parked below, blocking traffic. The driver not visible. The property is the right play, he said. I've looked at the comps. The exclusion on capital gains makes it a different calculation than it appears. I know. His attorneys have not done that calculation. I know. He nodded once. Then let's go back in. In the third session, with Thaddeus presiding and the afternoon light coming through the conference room windows at a flat angle, I made the offer. I said, I am prepared to waive my interest in the retirement account in its entirety. In exchange, I am asking for a full equity buyout of the Haverstock property, the full balance of the joint brokerage account, my own IRA and retirement accounts, and the primary vehicle. I said it in the voice I use when I am not performing any particular emotion because I do not need to. The flat declarative of someone delivering a decision. Callum looked at Dorian. Dorian looked at me. I had spent 9 months practicing this. The face I wore was the face of someone who has made a concession she is not entirely comfortable with, but can live with. A face that looked tired, slightly resigned, focused on moving past this particular room. I had rehearsed it not in a mirror, but in the interior where faces are actually formed, in the decision about what to feel and what to show. I showed nothing that was useful to him. There was a moment where Dorian looked very carefully for the catch. He was intelligent. He knew me. He knew that I was not, typically, the person who gave ground without understanding what the ground was worth. He did not find the catch because the catch was not in the room. The catch was in a business plan 18 months away, in a funding environment that was turning against him, in a company that was already burning more than it was making. "We'll need to review the property valuation against our own assessment," Callum said. "Of course," Gideon said pleasantly. "We'll share ours." Outside, in the elevator on the way down, Gideon looked at the floor numbers changing. "He bought it," he said. "Yes." His attorney looked relieved. "His attorney has been fighting for the account for 2 sessions. He got it. He's going to tell his client they won." "Did they win?" Gideon said. "That depends on what they do with what they got," I said. I swear the settlement was finalized on a Thursday in June. I received the Haverstock condo with full equity, $692,000 after the revised market assessment, the joint brokerage account of $94,000, my own IRA and 403B balances, and the paid-off vehicle. Dorian received the 401k at $818,000, the other car, and a nominal cash payment. The settlement agreement noted, formally, that the retirement account was the larger asset by $126,000. It was written into the document as an acknowledgement of consideration. His attorneys wanting it recorded that he had not taken the worst deal. I signed the document. I signed the QDRO waiver. I signed the property transfer. On the last page, in my own handwriting, the line, "I waive my interest in the above account." Thaddeus the mediator stamped the copies. Callum collected his. Gideon collected ours. Dorian and I left the building from different exits. I moved out of the Haverstock building on a Tuesday. The movers were careful, professional, done in 4 hours. I left behind a set of kitchen items I had bought with my first paycheck at Meridian because I did not want them in my next life. The thought surprised me, that I had a clear and specific sense of what my next life would contain. The apartment I rented was on the 9th floor, west-facing. The morning light was wrong for coffee, but correct for reading in bed. I decided that was fine. Patricia had helped me structure the condo equity into a short-term treasury ladder while I assessed longer-term options. The brokerage account was already in my own name. My retirement accounts were growing at the maximum contribution rate. So as the Meridian projects were going well enough that Josephine had used the word promotion in a sentence that was not hypothetical. I did not think about Dorian, not because thinking about him was painful, because he was no longer the relevant variable. I heard about the withdrawal from a mutual acquaintance at a dinner party 6 months after the divorce was finalized. His name was also Gideon, not my attorney, a different man entirely, a former business school contact of Dorian's, who appeared at these dinners as a kind of social constant, the person who knew everyone in the room but was close to no one. "Did you hear about Aldercroft?" he said. He had the tone of someone who finds other people's financial disasters interesting in an aesthetic sense. "I don't follow it," I said. "Dorian liquidated the whole 401k. All of it." He shook his head in the thoughtful way of someone cataloging an error they did not make. "Emergency capital injection. The Series C fell through." I was holding a glass of red wine that was too cold, the host having made an error I had not corrected. I noted this. "How much?" I said. Callum, Dorian's old law school friend, said north of 800, the whole balance. "Approximately 818, I said. He looked at me. "Educated guess," I said. "At his bracket. He had a good consulting year. He's going to lose what? 35%? More? 42%, accounting for state," I said. "Give or take." He stared at me. "I have a good accountant," I said. I stayed at the dinner for another hour. On the walk home, through a city that smelled of October and the particular cold of the first week you need a coat, I did the math properly. $818,000 minus the 10% IRS early withdrawal penalty, $81,800 gone immediately. Remaining $736,200 taxed at federal marginal rate of 32%. $235,584. State income tax at the applicable rate, $36,810. Total to penalties and taxes, approximately $354,000. Capital reaching Aldercroft Ventures from an $818,000 liquidation, approximately $464,000. He had had $818,000 on the statement. He sent $464,000 into the company. $354,000 had evaporated in the transit between the plan and the business. I did the math twice, with the precision of a person who wants to be correct rather than satisfied. Both times, the number was $354,000. My apartment was dark when I got home. The western light was long gone. Once I sat at the kitchen table with my shoes on and the coat still across my shoulders, and I thought about the settlement document with the line that said the retirement account was $126,000 more valuable than the property equity. The retirement account was $126,000 more valuable. At the time, the document was signed. In the intervening months, Dorian had lost $354,000 of it to penalties and tax fees and sent the remaining $464,000 into a company that was, according to the same mutual acquaintance, still struggling to close its next milestone. I sat at the table for a while, then I got up and made tea. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be specific about this. What I felt was the particular flatness that comes after you have been correct about something you wished you were wrong about. The math had worked the way I said it would work. So that was not a victory in any register I wanted to celebrate. What it was confirmation that the months of preparation had been correctly oriented, that Patricia had been right to trust my reasoning about the asset values, that Gideon had been right that the performance and mediation would hold. I took off my coat and hung it on the hook by the door. I went to bed. Aldercroft Ventures failed in February. I read about it in a business newsletter I had subscribed to in the early years of the marriage and continued to receive. The newsletter covered it in 4 paragraphs. A clean energy company that had been unable to close its Series C after an extended fundraising period had made a significant personal capital injection that extended its runway and had ultimately been unable to bridge to the next funding milestone. Or the piece described the company as having been led by highly capable founders navigating a challenging market environment. I read that phrase twice. Then I closed the newsletter. There was some social noise in the weeks that followed. People who knew us both reached out with the careful tentativeness of individuals who don't know what the protocol is when a former spouse's business fails in a financially publicized way. I was uniformly pleasant. I expressed the appropriate neutral regret. I did not discuss my settlement. In March, Patricia called. "The Haverstock comps are up again," she said. "I know. I've been watching." "You've been watching." "I look at the comps every 2 weeks." I was at my desk at Meridian. I'm at the eastern-facing office I had asked for and received was catching the morning light in the way I had known it would when I asked for it. "The property is up $44,000 from the settlement valuation." "42," she said. "The March comps came out this week," I said. 44. A pause. "I'll take your word for it." "I want to talk about selling." "The condo?" "I still meet the 2 of 5 year residency requirement for the capital gains exclusion. If I sell in the next 12 to 18 months, I exclude the full gain from the settlement valuation forward. After that, the clock starts to complicate things." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "You've been planning this since before the settlement." "Since 8 months before the settlement." "The Roth conversion we discussed in January, I want to do that this year. If I sell the condo and bank the proceeds, my income profile for the next 2 years looks different. I want to do the Roth conversion in a lower income year." She made the specific small sound she makes when she is revising her timeline for a piece of planning that has turned out to be ahead of schedule. "You're more organized than I gave you credit for," she said. "You gave me a great deal of credit," I said. "Evidently not enough." I sold the Haverstock condo in April, 13 months after the divorce was finalized. The market had moved the way I had told Patricia it would, and the capital gains exclusion applied fully. The proceeds went into the strategy we had been building together, a diversified allocation across indexed funds, REITs in sectors I had spent 3 months studying, and a continued maximum contribution to my own retirement accounts. The total value of my portfolio, 13 months after signing the settlement document, was $847,000. The settlement document had said I received the lesser asset. The retirement account had been $818,000 on the day of signing. Dorian had liquidated it. He had received $464,000. He had sent $464,000 into a company that had since closed. The difference between what he had and what he had now was $354,000. The difference was the penalty. The difference was the taxes. The difference was the cost of taking money that was not meant to be touched and touching it because you needed it to be something it was not designed to be. I did not run the comparison calculation more than once. That felt like the wrong direction to look. I was not interested in his number as a reference point for mine. I had done what I had done because it was correct, not because it would be more than his. It happened to be both. In early May, I received an email from Dorian. The subject line said only, "I'm sorry." The body was 4 sentences. He was sorry for what he had done during the marriage. He understood if I didn't respond. He hoped I was doing well. I read it twice. I opened a draft and typed, "I appreciate you saying that." I read it. Then I deleted it. I opened instead the investment portfolio tracker that Patricia and I had been building over the past 6 months, the one that charted contributions, returns, rebalancing triggers, and the projected trajectory over 10 years. The numbers were doing what we had planned for them to do. That they were patient and consistent in the way numbers are, the way people are not. I saved the spreadsheet. I did not respond to the email. There is a thing I want to say about the woman who sat in that mediation conference room and wrote, in her own hand, "I waive my interest in the above account." She was not performing sacrifice. She was not being noble. She was not doing what people do when they make concessions in difficult rooms, giving something up because they are tired, or because it feels like the generous thing, or because they have decided that peace is worth a price they will regret later in a quiet apartment. She was executing a plan she had spent 9 months building with 2 people she trusted who were very good at their specific work. The plan was not complicated, but it required something that is harder to sustain than intelligence, the willingness to be patient while holding information that wanted to be deployed, the willingness to perform uncertainty while being certain, the willingness to let the other side believe they had won the moment they were in, while knowing that moments are not the unit of measure that matters. The unit of measure that matters is what you have at the end of the year, and the year after that. I want to explain the financial mechanics clearly because they are the point. A 401k or similar employer-sponsored retirement plan looks like money on the statement. It is, in fact, a promise of future money subject to specific conditions. The condition is, do not access this before age 59 and a half. If you honor that condition, the money grows tax-deferred until you retire and begin withdrawing, at which point you pay income tax on what you take at whatever your rate is in retirement, which is typically lower than your working rate. If you break the condition, if you access the money before 59 and a half, the penalty is 10% of the amount withdrawn, paid immediately to the IRS as a flat penalty tax. This is separate from and in addition to your regular income tax, which you also pay on the full withdrawn amount at your marginal rate. For someone earning significant income in the year they withdraw, as Dorian was, with consulting work on top of his depleted salary, the marginal rate is 32% federal, plus whatever the state takes. You can reach a combined effective rate of 40 to 45% or more. A QDRO, by contrast, moves a divorcing spouse's share of a retirement account directly to that spouse's own IRA without triggering the penalty or any immediate tax. The account administrator processes the order and the funds transfer as a rollover. The alternate payee, the divorcing spouse receiving the funds, pays no penalty and no tax until they begin withdrawing from their own IRA in retirement. This means that a QDRO recipient and a voluntary early withdrawer are accessing the same type of account, but the QDRO recipient keeps 100% of what they receive, while the early withdrawer keeps 55 to 60 cents on every dollar. What Dorian's attorneys had proposed in mediation, an equal QDRO split, would have given each of us $409,000 in penalty-free rollovers. That was the fair deal. That was the correctly structured deal. And I did not take that deal. I took the condo equity, which looked smaller and which his attorneys had formally noted was the lesser asset. The lesser asset did not evaporate in a funding crisis. The lesser asset appreciated. The lesser asset was taxable under exclusion rules that made its effective yield higher than its face value suggested. I understood the assets. That was the whole of it. Not brilliance, not access to secret information, not a savior who explained things to me. Patricia had explained the QDRO to me in our first meeting in plain language in an hour. The capital gains exclusion is a line in the federal tax code that is available to any person who reads it. The early withdrawal penalty is published by the IRS on a form that is free to download. The information was available. I had time to find it. When I chose to use the time. In May, 6 weeks after I chose not to respond to Dorian's email, I went to Patricia's office for our quarterly review. The coffee was still the same. Her assistant still brought it without being asked, still in the white mugs with the chip on the third one that I had drunk from every visit. The legal pad was gone, replaced with a laptop that Patricia used at about 30% of its capability and didn't seem to feel bad about. We went through the numbers. The portfolio was doing what it was supposed to do. The Roth conversion had been processed. The Meridian 403B was at maximum. The real estate investment trust position had performed adequately. There were 2 adjustments to consider for the next quarter. At the end of the meeting, Patricia closed the laptop and looked at me. "How are you?" she said. She didn't ask this often, or in the vague, all-purpose way. She asked it in the specific tone of someone who wants a specific answer. "Good," I said. "I'm working on something at Meridian that I'll tell you about when it's finalized." "The promotion?" "Yes." "When?" "June, probably. Josephine has been clear." She nodded. "The financial impact is meaningful for the contribution modeling." "I know. I've already run the projections." She looked at me with the expression she sometimes had when she was deciding whether to say something. "What?" I said. "Nothing substantive," she said. "I was just thinking about the first time you came into this office this year, the morning of your anniversary. You walked in like you already knew where you were going." I thought about that morning. The cedar smell on the pillow. Took the vitamin row 2 inches to the right, then moved back, the city below doing what it always did. "I had a very clear picture of where I didn't want to end up," I said. "That's most of it." Patricia smiled, a small economical smile. "That's most of everything," she said. I left her office and walked the 3 blocks back to Meridian. The spring air had the particular quality of late May, warm enough to be pleasant, cool enough to move through without discomfort. The city smelled of coffee and exhaust, and the specific diesel note of a crosstown bus. I was 40 years old, in a city I had chosen, with a portfolio that was growing in ways I understood and could explain, with a title that was going to change in the next month, with a lease on an apartment whose western light made the afternoons very good. I had left behind a settlement document that said I had taken the lesser asset. I had left behind a man who had liquidated the greater asset and sent the residue into a company that had since closed its doors. I had left behind a vitamin row I had moved 2 inches to the right on a morning in October and then moved back, testing the edges of a life that turned out to be real and changeable and entirely mine to work with. The city did not care about any of this. Cities don't keep score. They just go on, indifferent and intricate, doing what they do. I walked the 3 blocks in the May air. I went back to work. In the autumn, I heard from the mutual acquaintance, who was also named Gideon, that Dorian and Lavinia had ended their relationship. That he delivered this information in the same tone he had used for the retirement account news. Interested, slightly removed, not unkind. He did not seem to know that it was information I had no particular use for. "How do you feel about that?" he said. "People always ask this." "I don't feel much about it," I said. He seemed mildly disappointed by this answer. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought you might want to know." "I appreciate that," I said. Then I changed the subject. The photograph Lavinia posted on Instagram that September, not from Barcelona, from a restaurant in the city, a glass of wine, alone. I noted the way I noted most things now. Once, clearly, completely, without the overlay of interpretation or significance. Then I put my phone in my pocket. The spreadsheet was open on my laptop. Under the numbers were doing what I had planned for them to do. I went back to work.